now Randolph College in Lynchburg, Virginia. Her business career has been in human resources in the field of retail and manufacturing, with the last 14 years as Director of Human Resources for Lehman's Gasket Company. I understand she's going to be going over to Reynosa tomorrow to work with the maquiladora, so we better wish her well. Some of us already warned her about how it's going over there in Reynosa. She's an active member of the National Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution. She is currently on the board of Lady Washington Chapter, serving as librarian, and is Texas State Chair for the Spanish Task Force, a part of lineage research, and State Chair for units overseas. As a member of the Spanish Task Force, her objective is to help others interested in researching their ancestors who may have a connection to Spain's involvement in the American Revolution. Anthony's sister, Molly Fernandez de Mesa, is a member of the España chapter in Madrid, Spain. Anthony and Molly first became involved in the search for more Spanish patriots and their records after a trip to the NSDAR New Mexico State Conference in 2004. Molly and Anthony were in Mexico City in June of 2014 with the Houston chapter of the Granaderos y Damas de Galvez. While in Mexico City, they spent 2 days in the Archivos de Nación copying one volume of the Donativos. Anthony's talk will focus on the Spanish Task Force and a review of the Donativos that were copied in June and what is still in the Mexico City archives to be copied. So without further ado, Mary Anthony starts.
Thank you. It is a delight to be here. Thank you all for coming out on this rainy Sunday afternoon. I also want to thank Mary Torres and Ophelia Olson for spending time with me before this presentation. I had a selfish reason for wanting to come speak to you and share this exciting presentation with you, because as we've uncovered these donativos that I'm going to talk about and what they're going to do, I need to become more knowledgeable about genealogical research in the Valley if I'm going to continue to help people join our organization through these records that we've found. So for me, it's starting on a great friendship and hopefully sharing of information. So thank you so much for having me. Also afterwards on my laptop, and Elizabeth Heiss, who's been my hostess, thank you, Elizabeth, we have copies of the donativos that will let you scroll through and look through over 600 pages. And also Ophelia has them on a flash drive that she will have for your chapter to play with afterwards. So with further ado, how do I scroll through this? Is there is there a clicker maybe? Or a helper?
How about that?
My trusty assistant. I'm going to spend just a few minutes. Many of you are probably aware of Spain's role in helping the cause of the American Revolution, but I'm just going to touch on a few things about it that many of you know, many of you may not. Did you know that during the Revolution, this is Burgundian cross that the Spanish carried under Carlos III, who reigned from 1759 to 1788. I also have a couple of extra CDs of this that I brought to share that many of you can take and use for your future programs that you may want to take to share this information. Spain helped. That's the flag of Spain. One of the things I want to do is get my notes out, just to make sure I'm not forgetting something. Helped the American colonies. I'll catch up to you. And if you go to this picture, Spain's help was more covert. Most people, when you study American history in junior high or high school, we hear a lot about Lafayette, and we hear a lot about the French involvement and Rochambeau defeating Cornwallis at Yorktown. But a little known fact is that it was the Spanish who paid for the French fleet that was stuck in the West Indies without any money to pay the troops. The French had to borrow from the Spanish so that those troops could get to Yorktown to defeat the British. That's just one little tidbit that many people do not know. Along with that, while France openly declared war early on against the French, Spain was not so eager to do it so openly because these were rebels, and what if the same thing happened in our colonies? We don't want that, sort of to spread, which of course later it did. But at the time, their aid was covert. What Spain was really interested in was getting West Florida back from the British, and so we're going to see a lot about that as well. Okay, I think we can go on. So let's touch on what was happening in some of these areas and see what the research shows us. Of course, all of you know that in Texas, and we can go to the next slide, that cattle was donated. Many of you may have friends or know people in the San Antonio area who descend from cattle drivers who, through correspondence with Bernardo de Galvez, he was asking for cattle to feed his troops and send up to Washington's troops. I also brought today a brochure on Bernardo de Galvez, so please, I don't want to take any of them home, so please take them all. Okay, also, I think one of the things that I have found most exciting, for example, Louisiana. I have people who descend from French soldiers who fought with Galvez who have said to me, I never dreamed I could join an organization like the Daughters of the American Revolution. I thought your ancestor had to be in the original 13 colonies, like many of our ancestors were. So for people to find out that because their French ancestor was in the militia from either St. Landry Parish or wherever they happen to be, or a direct soldier who came over as a Canary Islander, or that they could be in the Daughters of the American Revolution was very exciting for them. So today, there are a lot of people who descend from patriots who were not in the original 13 colonies who are members of the Daughters of the American Revolution. And I think that's one of the things that my presentation today is going to talk about, the research that my sister and I, the records we found in Mexico City, and the records still there that need to be copied, are going to open up membership to hundreds of thousands of people in this part of the world. But for now, some of the lists that we'll talk about, there are list of soldiers who fought in Louisiana. They're Canary Islanders. The King of Spain needed soldiers to fight with Galvez, and so in the Canary Islands, you could come and bring your family, and if you fought, you could get land. New Iberia, Louisiana is one town that still has a Canary Islander festival every October and recognizes their heritage back to this. Harriet McCallum was a DAR member in Arizona who found or was the person who transcribed and documented the donativo lists that were found there. And also there were donativo lists found in Santa Fe. And those lists have been around for a long time and would have sparked the interest to go find the rest of the donativos. And I'll speak more to those in just a second. Let's see. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So let me just tell you a little bit about what the donativos were. And you can go to the next slide too. Go again, one more. In New Mexico, at the Presidio of Santa Fe, and also in Arizona, the donativo lists were found in the Spanish colonial records there about 20 years ago, I believe. And the list there, Carlos III issued a decree that everyone in Nueva España had to give a donativo, or a donation, or what we would call today a voluntary tax, to raise money for the war effort. And I have a handout that you'll see. The donativos were not just, when I first heard about the donativos, I just assumed it was solely for the American Revolution, for the war against England. But apparently it was something that was relatively common that the Spanish kings would do periodically when there was a new war. For example, it was a war in 1793-94 against the French, and those Donativo records are in the Bear archives. And we've had people mistakenly pull those records out thinking they had found the ones for the American Revolution. So the Donativo practiced by the king was a relatively common practice, depending on the war. But the Donativo we have not found the Donativo list for the Presidios in Texas that the soldiers gave, but we do have them for Santa Fe, and we have them for Arizona, and we don't have them for California either. And the Daughters of the American Revolution, if you descend from a Spanish soldier who was fighting during the time of the American Revolution, he had to actively be involved. He could be at Gibraltar fighting the British. He could be in Louisiana and up the Mississippi River, but he couldn't be just stationed in a Presidio in California. However, the Sons of the American Revolution say any soldier, no matter where they were during the American Revolution on the Spanish, as a Spanish soldier, can be in the Sons or in the Sons of the American Revolution. The AR hasn't quite opened that up yet. So we have to prove. I have a good friend in Houston who is from Laredo. She has a Captain Tovar, T-O-V-A-R, during the American Revolution. He's Spanish. He's out in a Presidio in California. So I said, no, just hold on. We're going to find your Donativo. So, because she's a Flores from Mir, so we're going to find that. So we can move on. The other thing, just to touch on briefly, to pull back from the Donativos, Bernardo de Galvez, as you know, was truly the unsung hero of the American Revolution. As governor of Louisiana, he covertly worked with a number of American spies to get supplies to Washington and his troops, to also block the mouth of the Mississippi River. We know the Battle of Fort San Carlos in St. Louis. We know the battles of Manchac, Baton Rouge, Mobile, and Pensacola. And these are all places that his soldiers came from. As was mentioned in my introduction, and we can move to the next slide. As mentioned in my introduction, I'll go back one more. That's my surprise slide. As mentioned in the introduction, I have a sister in Spain who has been very involved in helping get records, military records, or she's been to Sevilla to the archives there, and she's been through a lot of the Cuban papers. My children descend from 10 French and a Spanish soldier who fought with Galvez. My mother-in-law was from Basile, Louisiana. So my daughter has many more ancestor bars than I do because of her Louisiana Patriots. So one of the most interesting things, and I'm going to go to the next slide, that you'll find is that this lady on the left is a woman named Jackie Huckabee who lives in Orange, Texas. She descends from a Jose Nunez who fought with Galvez, who was a Spanish soldier, and a Furman Bro, a Joseph Landry, and a Pierre Richard. And she shares Joseph Landry and Pierre Richard with the young lady in the middle, who happens to be my daughter. And they also share Joseph Landry and Pierre Richard with the young lady on the right, who also is from the Lafayette area originally and now lives outside of San Antonio. And she's a prospective member of the Captain Kendall chapter in Bernie. So it's just wonderful to see that they're fifth cousins, the two on the right. My daughter and Gabrielle are fifth cousins. So how the blending of racial backgrounds and colors can come from ethnicity, can come from any patriot. So I thought that was kind of an exciting thing for us recently to discover. So just to kind of move on just a little bit about the military records. The Sumatran archives, if you think you have an ancestor who was here as a soldier during the time of the American Revolution or any other time, this is how this pares.mcu.es is an amazingly easy, even for someone who does not read or speak Spanish very well, is a very easy archive online to drill into. You just put the name, the date range, and by collection, and the collections come up, and you can find. We have had numerous people ask us, well, my ancestor was a Sanchez, and I think he, we have a rumor that he went to Puerto Rico and then he fought in Cuba. And sometimes we don't find them, but they're there, and it's truly remarkable. As you'll see, I believe, on the next slide, this is my friend from Laredo. This is her Tavares, a record, and we could blow it up. It just the description of everywhere he was and how old he was at each stage of his entire military career is on one page. It's just really quite something. So here we're getting to the exciting part of my presentation. This is my sister and me. Have any of you ever been to the archives in Mexico City, the Archivos de Nation? It's really a remarkable place. This giant center that we're in it was an old prison that was an active prison, I believe, to the early 1970s. And it has this very round center, and off of it are these long hallways. And each hallway is a different period of Mexico's history. You have the pre-colonial history, you have the Spanish colonial, then you have the reign of, I'm gonna blank on his name. But then you have Porfirio Diaz and Juarez, but who was Carlotta and Maximilian, thank you. Huge section on that period, even though it was a very short period. But the Spanish colonial records were the busiest section. And so there is I have this, numerous copies of this by the front door that tell a little bit more about our day, or 2 days there. And my sister had been previously in 2008, and the archives had catapulted and leaped to the 21st century. And now you can take a camera in where before they would only hand copy so many pages a day. Really, they're allowing the public in to really copy and study these records. But the badging process to get in takes about an hour. You pay, the equivalent of maybe $10 or $20. You have your photograph taken, your thumbprint taken. It's a whole background, and you get my ID is good for 5 years to come back and research. But when you come in their lockers and you go through security, you're only allowed to take a camera. You can take a camera, cell phone, and pencils and paper, but you really are checked, and your purses and everything have to stay in your lockers. There is a bookstore that's quite something, a research store. There's also a little cafeteria, a little sandwich shop, so you don't have to leave the archives, but there is a nice Sanborn cafeteria around the corner. There's also, what else was I going to tell you about the archives? Oh, we stayed at a Best Western that was in the old part of Mexico City that had a van that dropped us off every morning and picked us up. Because there were people going, weren't you nervous about security? And really, we felt Caroline Krim takes the subway to the archives. So, there are people who say, don't worry about it. But you get in and the time flies once you get in there. So in the Spanish colonial area, you'll see, this is how we got in. And also, you do have to have gloves. And we didn't have a mask, but there were many people, I guess because of the dust and the age and the mildew kind of smell, people had them, but we didn't plug it. And there were plugs to plug in your computer. You could bring your laptop. So what we were looking specifically for were the donativo list for the period of the American Revolution. We knew they were there. We didn't know what areas they covered, but we knew because Molly had been and seen them about 8 years previously. So we copied an entire book. Actually, I think it's over 600 pages that we copied, 300 on my cell phone and 300 on my sister's. And after being there for 2 days, our hands were like cramped from clicking, one holding the book and one taking the pictures. And so now we know when we go back, we're going to have a serious digital camera. There were so many, serious researchers it would be like a professor with their student turning the pages and holding the book or holding the camera. I mean, there was just a tremendous amount of copying being done. But to speak, and I think I've kind of mentioned some of this a little bit, Carlos III issued this decree that every Spanish citizen was requested to donate 2 pesos, and every Indian and mestizo to donate 1 peso. And the DR Patriot dates are April 1970-75. Now for Galvez, it's December of 1776 through November 26, 1783. But apparently I hear DR is working on expanding that. So these donativo lists would prove anyone who lives or grew up in any part of Nueva España, what is today present-day Mexico and the United States in the Daughters of the American Revolution. Okay. So what I'll talk about in a minute is I gave the donativos to a couple of friends who I knew would have the time to start flipping through it and reading through it. And the majority of the towns, we realized, and Elizabeth and I have talked extensively about this, the volume that Molly and I copied is primarily south of Mexico City. It is Oaxaca. It's not this area. So we know this area are in the volumes that we didn't copy, the 2.5 that are still left there to copy. So that means a trip back. But this, I unfortunately can't blow it up, but it shows what the provinces were. And this big province number 6, this province number 6 actually is San Luis Potosi in 1781 that goes up across the Rio Grande today and to where we are. So, so when we find it, it's going to be quite exciting. Okay, let's look at next. I guess next, I think one of the things we talked about before, Ophelia and Mary and Elizabeth and I, is to go back and find out what the place name was. We can keep going. Was in 1781. So until we can go back and get the other 2 volumes, 2.5 volumes copied for this particular time period, our objective is to get as many people interested in researching their lineage back to 1781 to do so that once we get the donativo, we can connect you. For example, I have a friend in Houston, Estella Ornelas, who works for Pamela, who grew up in El Paso, and through family search, a baptism and marriage records, we have her in Saralvo in 1781. So all we have to do is find that donativo, and Estella is in. So we're very, it's getting exciting. So the Daughters of the American Revolution National Board of Management meeting in October, they have put aside funds to send someone back to copy the additional volumes. As Elizabeth and I talked, at some point, if I go, I want to make sure I have 3 or 4 days to really do it right, to maybe even recopy some of what we copied, and to right now get that much vacation that isn't involved around family to go do this. We'll get it done. So, and then the other piece is DAR is working on an electronic search process. We've decided we're going to work on some of it as well, so that once you start, we want to be able to put your name in, Fernandez, or put Garcia, or put Gonzalez, or whatever the name is, and it pull up everywhere it is in the documents, so that you can, or a town. And then, so we've got some work to do to get it to a quick searchable format versus the state it's in today. This is a book that is one of the pages, there's a lot of, what I found interesting about seeing these documents versus the ones that are in a book form from Arizona and New Mexico, is that the language at the beginning of each chapter, if you will, is this exact same. We're collecting a tax from the towns and regions of X. We are we're covering churches, monasteries, convents, guilds, rancheros, pueblos, haciendas, everything. And at the end, are the totals or sums for those, I guess, like a region. You know, I guess you were given like a county or a province today. So this is the totals page. This is a page that clearly, and again, we'll pull these up on the computers and let you play with them afterwards. You can clearly read these names. And you can clearly read whether it's an Espanol, a Mestizo, or an Indios. And I also have electronically, for anyone that's interested in a PDF format, and I've given some hard copies to Ophelia and to Mary. I just happened to be Googling the donativos one day, and I found about a 30-page article in Spanish from a woman who's a professor in central Mexico, who I don't remember what year, within the last 15 years, actually went through these donativos and broke them out by town and location, by how many, her objective and focus was to show just how much the Indios and the Mestizos donated to the war effort. It wasn't just the Spanish who were living here. In many cases, it was more the indigenous population that donated towards the war effort. So her, yeah, you can just, I think I put about 5 or 6 pages, but go back if you don't mind. Go back. This just shows you, as you go through the documents, like this is the town of Salamanca, I believe, and then it just lists the names and then the amounts. You'll be able to see it a little easier when you look at it on a computer screen. But they're really quite easy to read. Now there's some pages that, you know, you kind of looking, and some pages bleed through because they wrote on, page 1 is a 1 and a 2, page 2 is 3 and 4. They number just the front of each page, and it's 2 pages, which is kind of interesting. But I guess we can just keep going through. I did a few more here. Also, I wanted to mention, and then here's some totals of names by little towns. I wanted to mention what took Molly and me to Mexico City was a very fortuitous event, an opportunity for us to go together. The former Spanish consul in Houston was a gentleman by the name of Miguel Angel Marizombros, who, when he left Houston, became the consul, or one of the consuls in Mexico City. And we knew when he retired, he was going to come back to Houston to retire. And before he left Mexico City, we were very active in Houston in an organization that I brought some brochures on, called the Order of the Granaderos y Damas de Galvez. And this was an organization founded during the bicentennial in San Antonio, and there were chapters in Houston, El Paso, Jacksonville, Pensacola, New Orleans, and Washington, D.C. And the original members and their wives or whomever, the goal was to go out and educate people on Spain's role during the American Revolution and who Bernardo de Galvez was. And the organization was very large, and then it kind of died out, and now we're bringing it back and searching. And so with Miguel Angel in Mexico City, we had a symposium at the Ibero-Americana University with Dr. Caroline Castillo Krem from Sam Houston State, spoke on Galvez. Miguel Angel spoke, and someone from the local university spoke. And we also went to the San Fernando Church, where Bernardo de Galvez is buried on one side of the church and his father on the other, and did a wreath-laying ceremony. So it was an opportunity to go have a small tour. There were about 15 of us. And so Molly and I went ahead and spent our 2 days in the archives. And I think this was just a page that was just a totals page that just was just remarkable. So that's what took us to Mexico City, and the opportunity to copy these records. Let me see if I missed anything else. I think that was is the end of my presentation. But before I take,
what's say for the total? It's like 300,000.
it could way at the bottom,
Yeah.
like 300,000 pesos.
Yeah.
It could be.
391,000 pesos.
Before I
39,000 pesos.
Before I take the questions that hopefully I can answer, I do want to, I have a presentation I would like to make, so I'm going to need someone to take a picture of this. We had our Texas Society Daughters of the American Revolution State Conference last week in Houston, and there is someone in this room who has done a lot to help the State Society, the Spanish Task Force in particular. And so I would like to ask Elizabeth Heiss to please come up here to present her with an award for excellence for her outstanding support of this Donativo project and housing me this weekend to come down and speak to you. Thank you. Thank you. And you have 2 copies, one for your chapter regent scrapbook.
Oh, yay.
What questions that I may or may not be able to answer?
How do we get to the donors? Is there a website? Is there a URL? How do we get to
Not, well, we have them on a flash drive because we literally just copied them in June. So they're not on a public website yet.
We're working on it.
Yes, yes. And then once we go back to get the ones in, like we were talking today, besides Oaxaca, Puebla, what were some of the other tasks? Veracruz are the ones that we copied. And so Ophelia will have them on a flash drive, and they're pretty big files though. So just make you.
Well, we're working on that. That's part of the project, is to get it, to put it up. And DR is very good about putting things up in public places for everybody to have access to. But what we want to do is index it, make it searchable. It's right now 600 pages. And so it's a lot to page by page by page through. So what we're trying to do is get them all transcribed so you can just search on a name. And then it'll say, oh, that name is on page 41, and then you just go to page 41. That's the project we're on.
So for now, get your, how many of you in this room have your ancestry, your Spanish or ancestors back to 1781 in Nueva España? See? How exciting. Okay. I also would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the chapter ladies from the local Daughters of the American Revolution who came out today. Many of you may or may not know Cheyenne Zink and Sue Francis and Joan. Anybody else? Well, thank you, ladies. I really appreciate this. What other questions? Yes?
when will it be, how is it going to be advertised each way?
That's a good question.
We'll
I
tell
think
them.
through, if you're an active member of this organization, you will hear about it.
You'll hear about it in Harlingen, because when it happens, I'll be letting all the Hispanic and the TOTGS know about it.
Now,
You're from Dallas.
join the group.
Give me,
I am a member.
and I'll give you, we'll trade business cards. I'll give you my info, so as soon as it's out, I'll let you know. You were gonna ask something.
You talked about Bernardo Galvez's his contributions, his military contributions in the Revolutionary War, but you didn't really talk about his actual battles. How many actual battles
Yes.
he actually fought and won along the seacoast that committed that the British Army had to, instead of being able to join up with the North to beat Washington, had to stay in the South to fight Galvez's forces.
And Bernardo de Galvez also was plagued by hurricanes and shipwrecks and supplies getting lost in this effort. And he died by the age of 40, and he was only governor of Louisiana for, I'd have to go back and look exactly, maybe 5 years or so. But when he was as governor of Louisiana, he had a previous stint in the New World, and was out in Texas. There's a fighting Indians and he somehow befriended the Indians. He had a way, he was very enlightened, if you will, and was not the traditional Spanish viceroy or governor. When he went to Mexico City, for example, there was a drought and people were dying, and he made the Spanish colonials give money and food to help feed the starving and the poor, which no viceroy had ever done that before. But back to his time in Louisiana, he meets Félicité de Saint-Maxent, who he marries, a local French Creole. East and West Feliciana Parish are named after her. She had a child, and they had three more children, one born after he died. But he was wounded in fighting the French off the coast of Africa before he came to, I think in Algiers, before he came to Havana. His father and his uncle were, his father was a prior viceroy of New Spain, and uncle was governor of Guatemala, I believe. But a family that was tied to military service historically for the King of Spain. But his troops that he had were French militia. They were slaves. They were Native American Indians at the time. They were Spanish recruits. So his ragtag soldiers, he had to get to, he leaves New Orleans and starts his trek through going east, defeats the British at Manchac, and when he defeated them there and at Baton Rouge, Natchez fell. Natchez just said, okay, we get it. And then he goes on to Mobile, and then from Mobile defeats General Campbell at Fort George, May 8, 1781. And growing in Pensacola, you know that date. It's also my mother's birthday. So I know it. But in Pensacola, at the foot of Halifax, at the hill at the top of Halifax Street, Fort George is still there, surrounded by St. Michael's Catholic Elementary School, which is now Episcopal Day School, and a lot of beautiful old homes up on North Hill. But people would find muskets in their basement, not musket balls and cannonballs in their basement up on the hill. People did, local archaeology for years. It was fascinating. But there is a statue, it's a bust of Bernardo that's up on the hill in front of Fort George.
Where was he buried?
Pardon me?
Where was he buried?
He is in Mexico City. Next to his father in the San Fernando Church, which is a beautiful old Spanish colonial area, which is kind of old rundown part of Mexico City. The church, once we raise money for the statue of Bernardo de Galvez in Galveston, we hope to go spend some money on that church because it really needs it. Next year is the 230th anniversary of the death of Bernardo de Galvez. And many of you may or may not know that he became an honorary citizen of the United States in December, the 8th or 9th, I believe, ever. Lafayette is a honorary citizen. William Penn and his wife, Mother Teresa, Kosciuszko, Pulaski, somebody help me, there's one other.
That was it.
The Dalai Lama, maybe? Anyway, and then Galvez was just named. And also, a portrait of him was just hung in Congress. So there's been some exciting things happening to honor him and recognize him and to start telling this story again about. And we're hoping, our Granadera's chapter in Houston is hoping sometime in it'll probably be 2016, to host a conference at Rice University on Galvez and Spain's role in the American Revolution. There is a thing called Yo Solo, I Alone, which was in his family crest that he was allowed to do because apparently the mouth of the bay in Pensacola is very shallow, and everyone was afraid to go in. The general or admirals that were with him would not take the ships in. So they said, we're gonna hit land, or we're gonna bottom out, or whatever the term is. And he said, I'll go alone. Forget you guys, I'll go. Yo Solo. And he went alone, and then they followed after he showed that we could go in. And but he did get lucky. Apparently there was a munitions, large powder keg of gunpowder up in the fort that exploded somehow, and that helped him rush in and defeat the British. He got very lucky. But he truly, to your point, without Bernardo de Galvez getting the British. One of the most interesting things is if he had not defeated the British in West Florida and the British had still been there, Andrew Jackson would never have been able to use Pensacola as his place of supply and support for defeating the British at the Battle of New Orleans. So there really is some long-standing credit that we owe him. There's also a wonderful story, a book that's being written now by about the battle up at Fort San Carlos in St. Louis. Uribe, I believe, was the name of the captain there, who a lot of correspondence with George Rogers Clark, he was working with to get either supplies up to Washington and keep the British out of the Mississippi.
San Bernardo Cathedral, is that in the plaza? Is there a plaza?
This is the San Fernando is just a church. It's not a cathedral, and it's.
But there is a plaza.
Well, in Mexico City, you have the big central plaza, but that is not the Church of San Fernando. I can't think of the name of it.
Closer to the Loteria Nacional.
No, well, I've been there, but I couldn't tell you the big where the flag goes up every day in the big central. There's a big cathedral there. The Zocalo?
That's the Zocalo.
Zocalo. But San Fernando is probably about a 20-30 minute drive from there. In an old it's a neighborhood church really off of a little plaza. And in fact, okay, well, you know why you've been there. Juarez is buried in the cemetery there. Benito Juarez is buried there. And I have a picture of his grave. Many famous people are buried in the cemetery behind San Fernando Church. Juarez is buried there along with a lot of other famous.
I have another question. What metro stop is it that leads you to the archives?
I will Google that, or if you give me your card, I'll email it to you. I can get, because Caroline Krim has done it on the metro. The hotel we stayed in had a little van that took us every day and picked us up. It was just wonderful.
One more thing. Also, to his credit, remember we were talking earlier that he actually, when he said that decree, that he should be credited really for having the first major cattle drive.
Yes.
Because in my mind, I always think of John Wayne playing
Yes.
Big John Chisholm, but in reality, he actually, in order to feed his troops, he got the vaqueros from San
Yes.
Antonio and
Yes.
Nacogdoches, I think
Yes.
Gonzales.
Yes.
And to supply the cattle, and as I understand, like from 1776 to 1781, there was over 10,000 head of cattle.
Correct.
Along with over 200 Mustangs.
Yes.
To supply his army. So he should be credited for the first major cattle drive.
And he is. In fact, Robert Thonhoff has written a book called The Texas Connection to the American Revolution that specifically talks about those cattle drivers. The State Cemetery in Austin has a beautiful red, pink granite, Texas granite obelisk, which has the names of all the American Revolutionary patriots that we can prove are buried in Texas. And all those cattle drivers' names are on there, as well as many who came with Stephen F. Austin and settled after 1820s. But it's if you're ever in Austin, it's a beautiful, beautiful statue or obelisk to see.
And all of those
Yes.
cowboys who drove that cattle, those are considered American
Patriots, yes.
To get into the
Yes, Daughters of American Revolution.
And their descendants could
Yeah, we have
qualify.
many members in the San Antonio area and Gonzales who are already in, and Victoria, who are already, there's a line of De Leons who, Blanche De Leon and her sisters, De Leon, Susan De Leon, De Leon.
Was it the Martin
So
de Leon
sorry.
family?
Yes, the family that was
Victoria?
split during the Texas.
War for Independence.
Yeah, War for Independence, that.
Well, they weren't
half-
split, they were run out.
Well, yeah, half the family went with Stephen, or with Sam Houston, the other family went with the Mexican government, yes. Caroline Krim has written a book about that, Professor Krim.
Yes.
She would be a great speaker, by the way. Side note. Thank you all. It's been a pleasure being here today.